there's something that you just said a little bit ago when you were talking about your own privilege, um, that I think triggers some white folks, right? To think, well, but what are you complaining about, right? And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. It's sort of why the freedom piece is in my title for the book, is the idea that it's that yeah, that's great that you have some privilege, but that's not okay that within that you also have this oppression that you're having to deal with, right? That has nothing to do with it, right? So just because you have some things going well doesn't mean that you don't still have to deal with this. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean,
So I'm curious.
yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, I'm curious, like your perspective on helping people to understand that even if you have some obvious privileges, that doesn't mean that this doesn't still affect you.
Yeah, I mean, I think whether someone understands that particular point or not is very much dependent upon whether they want to understand it. You know what I mean?
That's true of a lot of this, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like that's why my strategy is what it is, because I realized at a certain point that the light bulb doesn't come on unless the person feels like you're talking about them. Like, people are very self-centered and just egotistic and really into their own personal life experiences, which why wouldn't they be, right? I mean, that's what you're familiar with. That's what you've lived with, right? That's what you know best. And so I start from that point because it kind of bypasses some of the difficulty in explaining some of these things. Like,
Yeah.
for instance, your point just now about what were you trying to ask me about explaining what distinction?
Just when if people see you as, oh well, you have these privileges, your life is good. What are you complaining about? Like,
Yeah.
what's.
Yeah, I try to get people to understand, first of all, that this is not my personal complaint. You know, like
Mhm.
I'm not at the customer service desk, trying to make a return or something like that. Like, this is a generations long campaign of tyranny
Yeah.
that I'm fighting against. Prelude, thank you so much for the gifted subs. Wow, I think these are my first gifted subs. Thank you. So yeah, this is about values, like you said. This is about making sure that I have values that I'm comfortable with, that I feel proud to have and share and live by. And that's what it's about, I believe these are values that we should take on as a country. I think that our country's history shows that we should take it on as a value.
Mhm.
And, it's as simple as that. I try to, like, it's funny because I personalize it to get people to understand that it's related to all of us personally, including myself. But then I kind of depersonalize it for that purpose, to show them that, like, yeah, this isn't about me facing oppression or being called the N-word or like being discriminated against, all things that have happened to me, and have impacted my life greatly. But that's just a part of it. It's not the main.
Well, I think it's a both and, right?
Yeah,
Like it is about that, and it's about a larger social problem, and it's about the systemic, and that's where people get lost a little bit and not understand when we talk about systemic racism.
what
It's
has
just
actually helped people understand for me, which is so weird to me, but this happened on social media several times when I would type this, and it would really resonate with people when I would call racism a multidimensional problem.
Mhm.
For some reason,
Yeah.
just saying that,
Yep.
people are like, I guess you could be right about that. Like, these are sometimes people who are fighting
Yeah.
you tooth and nail, just reading that for some reason makes
Yeah.
people, so it's finding little things like that through experience, and communication, that you learn how to, as the good Morty here wrote in the chat, to get a foot in the door. You learn how to do that, and I just want to kind of flex those muscles and use it and get out there in environments, that doesn't happen for people, in the race context. And just open up some doors, that is where hope lies. And that's
I
where
hear
I
the
want to go.
teacher in you and all of this. Like
Yes, sir.
yeah,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
I mean, through and through, for sure.
Well, you mentioned the viewers. Like, I'm really curious about the response that you get from the viewers, and some of the comments that you read earlier. They're really, really, sharp comments. So I love it, and I think that you can learn from that as well. Have there been any times where viewers have offered perspectives and that have really been interesting, and you've been able to build on them?
All the time. Uh, I would say some comments about narcissistic personalities and their prevalence in people with positions of power is something that I hadn't thought as much about until someone in the comments was writing about it frequently. So that's one thing. Kind of nuances about within the Black community and the Black experience, like generational differences that are starting to influence anti-racist efforts, I would say, and organizing. Like some of the older generation who were kind of forced into being second-class citizens and finding a way to survive in those kinds of environments through Jim Crow and whatnot. They're experiencing a freedom that they've never experienced now in their late years. And a lot of them are seeing our present racial situation and environment as more toxic than the one that they grew up in. And it's kind of creating this situation where they're kind of like, okay, well, I'm at the end of my days here and I'm just going to like kind of, YOLO it. And, and there's this disconnect between the younger generation, which is experiencing insidious, high levels of racism that's continuing on. And I don't feel like they're being really supported and guided about what to do for the future. That's why I really like being a teacher, and I really like stepping into that role and mentoring, which I do a lot. But we need a lot more of it.
Could you talk more about the generational trauma piece that you kind of hinted at? Because it's not just the person that's lived through all these things. Some of this stuff just because you mentioned the generational impact.
Yeah, what I was talking about there was just like having grown up through such like overt and direct oppression, right? And then like kind of not, right? Experiencing a little bit, less of that over time, and then also being more financially stable and economically you have a little bit more power and freedom to do what you want, and you never had that before. So just like things that normally would happen early on in your life, in a typical like imaginary American life, right?
Yeah.
For them it's happening now in their later days, and so there's kind of like a lag, I guess you could say, in like dealing with that. It's like when you get your first paycheck, right? And then you're like, okay, I'm gonna go out and spend this. Like if you haven't been taught to save or like whatnot, or you haven't, had money to spend, then you're apt to spend it. And I think it's kind of a similar situation that's going on where like you got a little pressure off of you and you want to stretch your wings. You want to flex your muscles a little bit and see what's going on. But I think it's let people take their eyes off the ball and realize and forget that this is a generational struggle. That's what I was meaning about then. But in other ways, like the generation stuff is, I don't know, it's so layered. It's hard to kind of sum it up, like there's medical aspects of it. There's social aspects of it, there's financial aspects of it. It's there's so many ways that my personal life and my professional life has been influenced by things that are so far beyond my individual ability to do anything about, and that can just be a very difficult position to navigate from and to feel empowered from. And I just if there's something I could share about the Black experience, it would be that, like that's what it's like, is to feel like you have no power, that you have nothing that you can do to actually, change things and to influence things. And even within the anti-racism space, like I'll watch people say the exact same thing I just said. I've been in many rooms where I'll see someone say exactly what I just said, and people be like, "Oh, what a good point," and I'm just like, "Huh," like, and what can you do? You, you know, I try to be happy about it, right? Because them hearing was the goal, right? But it still doesn't feel good, right? And it still reminds you have constant reminders of the fact that you're not seen the same way as other people who are racialized differently, that you are constantly deemed inferior, even by people who, like, for instance, I was invited to be on a panel discussion with 4 other teachers when I was an alumnus from the New York City Teaching Fellows Program, and I was part of a teacher mentorship program at the City University of New York in New York. And I was on this panel. I was invited by a professor at City College. And when I got down off the stage, she practically ran towards me, smiling ear to ear. And she's like, "Oh my God, you did such a good job." Like, she's like, but you could tell by the way she's saying it that she was shocked. Like, that she didn't. I'm like, what did you expect I was gonna do when you asked me to be on this panel? Like, you're basically betraying that you had some kind of other expectation, and that I've like somehow like exceeded it. But I thought you invited me here because you respected my work and what I'm doing, and it just creates all of this confusion about support and asking for help and who to trust and how to get things done. And yeah, it's just a difficult thing to navigate. And unfortunately, it's not something you can really understand unless you experience it or observe someone else experiencing it, because it's so holistic, and then for other people, it's not, right? It's not at all even existent. So, yeah.
Well, I think when you were talking about it being multidimensional, I think that was the word you used. That's true with respect not only of the problem but also of the experience of it, right? It's psychological, it's sociological, it's all of these different things, and I think you're right. It's something that you can empathize with but can't fully understand unless you've experienced it to some degree. Um, and I was thinking about what you were saying about when you say something and then hear somebody else say it. Those of us that do this work, as you probably have done yourself, we'll have conversations like, look, they need to hear this come out of your face. Right.
Period.
And so that's how we'll decide who's saying what or how we're going to do something in a presentation or at a workplace, even like, okay, that's going to be received out of my face. Or another time it won't be received from me. It'll be received by somebody else better. But that's all that strategy stuff, right?
That's right. Yeah.
It doesn't make it any less absurd or frustrating.
Yeah. And it's also, I'm conflicted about it too, because I'm like, they probably need to hear it out of both of our mouths, right? In reality. But we know that they're more likely to hear it coming from one mouth or another, And so, yeah, that's the difficulty is kind of towing that line, but ultimately making sure that we're still challenging people, to investigate their own biases and to investigate their own programming and unlearn some of the things that they've learned. Yeah.
Well, I always told myself I didn't need to be the one to write a book or to be on camera or anything, because there's a lot of people doing it already, and I just don't need to be the one. But what you just said is another part of why I was willing to write the book was because there are a lot of great books on anti-racism, right? There's a whole bunch behind me. There's a whole bunch in the other room, and you've got a whole bunch of them. There's brilliant voices, right? People that are better writers than me, that are much smarter than me. But not everybody can hear, that person, right? That I heard, right? So when I read Race Matters, that came from a voice that I heard, right? But there are plenty of people that are never going to listen to that. So if me saying something similar, using my experiences, my stories, is going to help somebody hear it, right? Because it had to come out of my face, so to speak, right? um, then good. Then I need to put it out there. There needs to be all those voices, and I think that's another part of the call for people to use their voices in their own unique ways, right? Because there's plenty of folks that are going to look at me and you as people that are focused on this issue as not valid, right? That's all they care about, or they have an agenda, however they want to say it. But somebody that they do respect um, speaks up about it in their own way, it might get through. Right? And that's why we need as many voices as we can saying similar things with the same goal of equity and inclusion.
Yeah, and that's walking the walk, right? Is showing that solidarity and that collaboration across racial lines.
Right?
Yeah, man. That's why I'm so grateful to have met you.
Same.
Yeah. You've been doing great work. I really enjoyed reading your story. Thanks for watching. For access to the full-length conversation and all of the 2-hour-long unedited conversations that I've had on race, click the support link in the description below. Thanks for your support, and see you next time.